Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. All right, everybody, welcome to Transformative Principle, a proud member of the B Podcast Network. I'm so excited to have Rod J. Naquin on the program today. And I say Rod J. Naquin because you are going to want to follow him on any social media, and that is how he is known on social media. Rod, welcome to Transformative Principle. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jethro. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you and who you are?
Certainly, yeah. I'm a former high school English language arts teacher here in the wonderful state of Louisiana, born and raised. After high school teaching, I did school leadership, and I coordinated professional learning, staff development, new teacher orientation across the state of Louisiana. Nowadays, I lead professional learning teams in a variety of contexts across the country, and I'm also a doctoral student of dialogue and knowledge in educational leadership.
Man, that sounds super nerdy and super awesome. I'm pretty excited to dig in here. And I do also have to mention that we were going to record this as part of the Summer of AI series. I'm going to add it to that anyway, even though that is now over. But I think it's going to be good information for this to be part of. So what is your big takeaway from this conversation today that the people should definitely look for as they're talking or listening to the show?
I think that there's a lot out there about generative AI, and there's a lot of amazing things that can help our personal and professional workflows. But I think the major thing I hope folks take away today is how you can utilize these new technologies to enhance and almost electrify your own reading and learning in a way that you can't even imagine. And once you open it up, you're not going to want to turn back.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a really great thing to take away. The other thing that I would add is that we talk about some strategies, but I don't want people to get bogged down in the strategies. I want you to think bigger picture about how you can use these tools in your own life to do better with whatever it is that you're trying to do. And to me, this is the real beauty of using tools like this, is that they're flexible enough that you can apply them to whatever it is that you're trying to do. We're going to talk a lot about academic research and things like that, but you can use this for whatever it is that you have in front of you that you need support with. And I think that that's the real key to using any of these AI tools. Anything else you want to add to that, Rod?
Well, I love how you said that, right? So I became an evangelical for LLMs, and I turned my wife on into it, and she's just like uses it with surveys, recipes, all figuring out what's going on with the Britney Spears book, all kind of different things. You can use it in any kind of context, I promise you.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Okay, we're going to get to my interview with Rod here in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening to Transformative Principle on the B Podcast Network. All right, Rod, so let's talk about the thing that I'm really interested in digging into with you today is this idea of conversing with alternate texts using AI. And so why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about how you're doing that already and what you're seeing with it?
Well, let me explain it this way, and this is how I've tried to explain it to some folks thus far, is like an image. Imagine an image on a touch screen or on your phone, on a tablet, whatever it is, and you have, like, say, a picture or a map or a diagram, and you're trying to zoom in on it or you're zooming out on it. And one thing that a chatbot can really do is, this is my process typically, is find a text that I would like to read more closely. Hey, what is this? Ask the chatbot to tell me what it is. It'll produce a summary for it. And then I can grab part of that and zoom in. So I can say, hey, can you tell me more about this part, this portion on student dialogue, or this portion on whatever it is that's inside that text itself. And I can like zoom in on it. It's almost like I'm going into the file itself and saying, just give me a huge version of what this part is. And I can zoom in and I can zoom back out in a way. It adds this like variability to, it's like a close read assistant that I can prompt in different ways to zoom in on parts of a text, or to zoom out, or to reformulate, or re-examine it from a different perspective.
Oh man, so that's very cool. So there is a problem with AI hallucinating and making things up. Are you seeing that that's an issue when it has a source text to reference, or does that get minimized?
It gets minimized, and I like that you asked that question, because I think that's kind of why I ended up with thinking about text as like a repository of knowledge, right? So one thing that we talk a lot about with LLMs and emergent technology is what the training data has trained that language model, and like what the language model itself knows. What I've come to really appreciate is, and I can have a little bit more reliability and validity to LLM's response when I'm using that model to be like a docent, or to invent. I'm giving it something to look at closely. In other words, I'm not just asking it for its knowledge and its training data about Bakhtin and dialogue. I'm asking it to leverage its training of within language and dialogue, and to access a particular text, and to produce something from that text. So I'm not going to say all hallucination is gone when you use it in this manner. Of course not. But and I've cross-referenced this dozens of times, and I invite folks always to cross-reference everything they're doing with generative AI. But when you focus an LLM's attention on a particular text, I've found that the reliability goes through the roof. In other words, I'm not just relying on the knowledge of the model itself. I'm bringing the model's knowledge to bear on a particular resource.
Okay, so that makes it different, because you're not just using those skills to answer any question. And this is something that I find so fascinating. As I've been doing these trainings over the past few weeks about artificial intelligence, I found that when somebody is just checking out artificial intelligence to begin with, they're like, wow, this is really cool. It's amazing. It can do all this stuff. But then when they try to get it to do a specific task, then the shortcomings really shine through, and they're like, oh, it can't do X, Y, or Z, and therefore it's not as cool as I thought. And I think that that's a really valuable thing to understand, because if you just are like, hey, give me a summary of this book from 1953 or whatever, and it can do it, then you're like, wow, that's amazing. But then when you try to get it to do something really specific, that's where I've seen that it falls through and becomes less effective and less meaningful. And what you're saying is, when you give it these specific texts to work through, then it takes a different approach, and it can really unleash the power of it. Is that a fair way to explain that?
I think that's a fair description. And what I found with my own use, I've been using language models for almost a year now, I suppose, is that nowadays I'm mostly, if not all the time, referring to a source when I'm using a chatbot. So if I'm trying to investigate what happened in the Champions League, I'm finding a source around that, and I'm using a bot to access that material. It's not altogether unlike what Bing can do, or other things that are connected to the internet. It's very similar to a language model that's querying or empowered to do kind of a web search. But what I've found is that there's a lot of risk, and kind of sometimes it's difficult to spot hallucination, right? If you just ask the chatbot to tell you Chinese history, one of the things chatbots do really well is create like a comprehensive response that gives you a sense of its validity. But what I've really been doing is always thinking about a third party, right? So it's myself, the language model, and what is the resource that we're examining. And so if I do it that way, I can triangulate kind of meaning in a more meaningful way, rather than relying on what is the training repository of the language model that I'm using.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good. So give me a couple examples of where you've used this, where you've been like, oh, that's where this is amazing. Let's do it.
Well, there's a paper that came out maybe a month or so ago. It's called "Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier." It came from a group of researchers at Harvard Business School, and they're looking at language models. And I've seen these papers in the past because of my line of work, right? So papers, scientific, scholarly literature, 20, 30 pages, diagrams, charts, all this complex stuff, which I've definitely spent my time with. I'm not trying to say we can't get anything from a complex source like that. But if I run into this research, somebody's chatting about it in the Edgosphere somewhere, I can take this and put it in a language model and say, what is this? And it gives me a summary of it. And then I can zoom in. So that particular paper is talking about like the frontier of things that language models or AI can do, and how it's not straightforward. There are some things that language models can do pretty well, and some things that are right across the threshold that are kind of challenging, but it's not a straight line. It's kind of a jagged area. And I can zoom into that paper itself and find out things about what is meant by that jagged frontier, what are some tasks that fall on one side or the other, and dissect that in a more meaningful way. I can zoom into it because I have that model there allowing me, like, it's almost like, like you said, having a conversation. So once this is what it's all about, tell me more about this portion of the paper, or this portion of the paper, or how AI can be an assistant, or a reading go-to summarizer, or whatever those utilizations are.
Yeah, I like that. So so I'm in a doctoral program, and I have to read a lot of text, and I've used AI to help summarize some things. I've used Readwise a lot for that, for a different reason that makes it incredibly powerful that I'll talk about in a second. How have you used this, and how would you suggest others use it if they are in a doctoral program? Because before I finish that question, one of the things that I've been telling people is you shouldn't use it to circumvent the learning process or bypass the learning process. You should use it to enhance the learning process. And what you've described so far sounds like it is enhancing it, because it's helping you isolate the things that are important from the readings. And we all know that we sometimes have readings that are more than is actually necessary, right? so so tell us about that, and how it's helped you in that regard, not to circumvent the learning process, but to enhance it.
I think there's a book that came out earlier this year. It's like AI for the rest of us, and the language they use in that book is augmentation, right? And I truly cannot imagine going back to a moment when I did not have my reading augmented by a language model. And how does that play into like ed leadership and ed scholarship? Sometimes we'll see an abstract, or we'll see a scholarly article's title, and think that maybe it has to do with what we're investigating. So I'm really passionate about dialogue and conversation, and how that plays out in school buildings. So there's plenty of titles that might pique my interest. Now, I'm not getting from that title, nor from the abstract, oftentimes, like enough about how the research is designed, or the theoretical bases, or some of the design elements that may be a little bit more specific, especially if I'm in the context of an ed scholarship or ed leadership or a doctoral program where I'm being tasked with looking at like research design, different methodologies, like the specifics of the case of the investigation. So what I found is that I have a folder in one of my emails. It's like 4,000 emails of recommended research, and I'd never been able to get to that. Now, when I get like Science Direct, it's like, hey, here's some research you might be into. I can click into one of those. I can use a language model to summarize that and see how close it is to my research, my scholarly interests, and how it like whether or not I want to investigate it any further. Whereas previous to that, I'm just bookmarking them all. It's hard for me to tell them apart because they kind of have a similar title. And then maybe I'll sit and highlight with them, and maybe if I print them out and put them into place, I'll notice them. And actually, but it's expedited kind of that process. It allows me to go right into it if I have less than 5, to see whether or not it's really worth a more powerful and thorough investigation.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. So what I use is I mentioned Readwise, and here's the process that I go through. I get a required reading and I put it into Readwise, and then Readwise has this ability to summarize the whole thing first using ChatGPT 5, which is like what you're talking about, except that it brings it in to the program itself. Now, whether they are using Claude or OpenAI's program or whatever it is, I think they're probably going to be working on adapting that to be most beneficial in the background. But the thing is that it allows that to happen pretty seamlessly within the program itself. And then as I read through it, then I can go through and I can ask it questions and things like that. But more importantly to me is I can highlight the things that I'm interested in, and then I can add notes to that as well. Then they get synced automatically to the tool that I use called Obsidian, which is where I keep track of all my writing and all the things that I collect over time, so that I can have those in a central repository. So it's really easy to cut and paste, and I can see where it is in the document. And one of the things that I'm well, first, do you have any thoughts on that process and anything to add or something I might be missing out on?
Well, I haven't really used Readwise itself. So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is like while you're reading, while you're in a text, whatever kind of text it is, that you're like naming, annotating, like saying, hey, this is an important piece, or adding comments, remarks, note taking, so to speak, and it's rolling that all up together, and then you're able to kind of query it, kind of have a dialogue sort of with texts that are in your archive and or notes or highlights, things that you've marked as worthy of revisiting. Is that a fair description?
Yes, except I don't do as much with the things that I've already noted. So there's a difference, and maybe it'll be easier if I show it. So if you're listening to this, I will extract out this part so you can go watch and see what I'm doing. So here you can see this now, right, Rod? Right? Okay. So here is this summary over here, which was generated by ChatGPT. It says this document discusses the impact of leisure time television. The author notes that while in fact the television affects school achievement is not challenged, research efforts, blah, 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 right?
Gotcha.
So what I can do up here is this is called Ghost Reader, which is like what you're talking about, is I can do different things that are built into it, like summarizing it, asking it a question, generating Q&A pairs based on my highlights. What are the things that you would be asking here in your process? What are some of the questions that you do to like zoom in on things?
No, that's a great question. I think let me see if I can pull up a recent example
Sure.
from like my never ending chain of of
Yeah.
summaries that I use, and let's see. Sometimes
And you're welcome to screen share also if you want, Rod, and then we
gotcha.
can see how that goes.
So here's an example. Look, I'll show you on my end. There was something that came across my network. Let me see if I can figure out how to share this window.
There we go. That looks like it's working.
I think that's showing up, right? So something that I came across maybe in the last 2 or 3 days, and it was a some tweets about this technology called Pegasus, which is, I think, this emergent training software that the goal of it is for it to be able to understand a video, so to speak, or provide it. It's like it's trained on video content, so to speak. So I wanted to know about it. So I went to their website. This is their website, and then I came in here and I said, "Hey, summarize this." And then here I come with this summary, and it responds. This is Claude to 100K, by the way. It gives me this response and rolls up pretty much everything that was in this big text and rolls it up into a little summary. This one I didn't have a follow-up question. Here's another one. Some journalism. I think it was published either this morning or yesterday about schooling and learning. All I asked it was to describe and summarize this post. Produces a little bit of a summary right here. I wonder if it still has this in context. So I can show you a little bit more about this. How about this? So another thing I think is important for folks to understand is the context piece. So one of the reasons why I'm drawn to Claude is because it has a large context.
And you're not using Anthropic's interface for this. You're using Poe, for example, which
Yes.
there are lots of different ways to access the different types of back-end engines for these things. And so you can use something like Poe, which is a interface for it. You can use something like School AI, which is one that I recommend, and you can use ChatGPT's OpenAI.com things itself. There are lots of different ways to do it, uh, and there's just lots of options. So we just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the reasons why I think I really kind of stuck with Poe is because very early on I wanted to use GPT-4, and I mean I had a couple shots on Poe, and then all of a sudden Poe started putting up all these other bots that I didn't know about, and I could try them out. They would appear on the side of my screen. So just being part of that ecosystem where things are emerging and new tools are emerging has been really helpful for me to be able to see that. That's why I found out about Claude's 100K token window, which I think is really important. And all I mean is by that is that it can take a large volume of text. And for a text dependent kind of guy like me, that's really fascinating. But to your original question, right? So now I have this text in this language model. It has it in this context, so to speak, right? So if I look at these bullets here, I see that there was a study in North Carolina. So what I can do is say, hey, tell me a lot more about the North Carolina study. So to your question, like they aren't as generic, the questions that I'm thinking about. Oftentimes it's really like dependent upon the text itself. So I learned up here that the study in North Carolina found that easing high school grading standards led to a big increase in GPAs initially. However, students with lower incoming test scores saw no GPA increase. So if I want to zoom in on that portion of the article, I can just ask, hey, tell me more about that study. What does it say about that study? And then I can see a lot more detail. In the first year under a new, easier grading scale, the number of A's increased by almost 20%, et cetera, et cetera. If I wanted to cross-reference that just to check if my bot was doing some hallucinating, I think it actually changed my URL right quick. But let's see if I can grab that. Just to check it. It's going to be on here anywhere. Let's see. I wonder if it's going to tell me about 20%. Just like the double, triple check stuff.
Yeah. I love how you're doing this, by the way. If you can't see what Rod's doing, I apologize. But what he's doing is he's just searching for the word 20 in the text so that he can see, because that's, just grabbing a chunk to find the spot in the document explaining what he's looking for. And this is like one of those little ninja things that people don't always think about, but there's a lot of power in knowing how to find this specific thing within the text. So go ahead, Rod.
Well, yeah, and I think it's great that you lifted that up, right? Because I've been thinking about the what these new tools can do, affording us an opportunity to have a conversation with the text, so to speak, like as if the text was alive, or at least it's like a docent between me and a text. It's like allowing a conversation. But I do think, like, to lift up what you just said, many of us have used some features of text search, like a control F, right? We've used tech to make sense of things. And I think you and I have connected on this before, like a code interpreter, right? So in many ways, what I'm showing you right now or talking to you about with text is not altogether different from what code interpreter can do with a CSV file. In other words, you're using an LLM tool to access a file and ask questions of it, reorganize it, ask if the data is organized, what's going on in there. It's an intermediary between you and a source. This one is just imagine it's a text file, and like we know how to query text files. We have 25 plus years of PCs and otherwise. A lot of us know control Fs. Imagine if instead of just a control F, you could say, where did it say something about North Carolina? What was the percentage that it quoted? Like, what was it saying about dialogue or whatever it is? Like, those are the kind of ways you can query a text using a language model. And that's why, like, I don't want to surrender and just go back to control F, Like, if I can have these rich conversations with a text, like, I can't imagine stepping back to that. It's just, like, really empowered me as a reader, as a learner. And I think you mentioned earlier in our conversation, right? One of the reasons I've been using tech my whole life since I was a kid in middle school, etc. When HTML was coming to life, I wanted to know what would if I was a high school kid right now, what would I be doing? Like, what would I be asking it to do? What can it produce, right? And that helps me as an educator to understand like what is out there and to think through like what the power can be, rather than to kind of dismiss it or keep it cloistered in a different area, right? So that's kind of what's brought me to this point.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we see is that some people are afraid or nervous to play around and experiment and see what's possible with these tools, and are waiting for people to tell them this is what you can do. So how do you feel comfortable experimenting and playing yourself without waiting for someone to say this is what you need to do next?
Well, like I said a little while ago, I think it's just part of my personality, right? So I'm a curious and creative person. Before I came to teaching, I was doing creative work, and at the intersection of a variety of things. Some of it is language, some of it is technology, some of it is teaching and learning. But primarily, I'm a learner, right? So you give me a new tool, I'm going to try to learn how to use it, and I'll probably try to figure out how to break it, right? And that's what happened with the first times I was using LLM. So I was like, well, you can break it by sending it too much text, right? And that is not a new experience for a person like me who's tried to use tools with too much text and found tools to say, hey, we can't do that. Like, you're giving me too much stuff. So I guess it's just like an ingrained, intrinsic part of my personality that has come into life there. But I've seen, like, to return to that, right? So as an educator, it's an amazing thing to be around learning. And the reason why I'm in education is because I love learning things. And why would I turn away from this tool that is like wildly accelerating my learning in a way that I cannot even comprehend? And that's where I'm at. So if I have that knowledge, then it helps me think about how these tools are going to occur in institutions of learning, in schooling institutions, in K-12, in college environments. Like, what does it look like? Because I wanted to be able to appraise with some kind of good faith the learning power of these tools in order to see how it would fit in a landscape of education. Because I'm fascinated with learning, because I have a techie background, and because like there's got to be a way. Like, this feels so amazing, and I'm learning stuff. How can I impart that to other folks? And that's kind of how I became evangelical about having conversations with text through LLMs.
Yeah. Well, I like that a lot because it gives you more ideas about what you can do, what's possible when you're just in there playing around and trying to figure things out. So I think that that's good. So let's talk specifically about one of the things I've been saying a lot is that we shouldn't be circumventing learning. How does this enhance your learning? I think you've already hinted on it, but I want you to be really explicit and direct about how this is making you a better learner using these tools like this.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I would name at the front end is just like extends the volume of things that I'm able to attend to. So whereas before I'd have to try to be as intentional as I can to prioritize what I'm reading, what I'm like sitting and reading, what am I listening to, what am I highlighting, what am I annotating. I have to manage my time very intentionally and make some choices about what I'm going to spend time with and what I'm going to spend less time without necessarily having a full appraisal of the sources that are at hand. Whereas now I can be even more intentional with what I'm choosing to zoom into. So, for example, my area of research is leadership talk, how leaders talk to one another. There's all kinds of stuff about leadership out there in the literature. There's different approaches, different frameworks, different conceptual frameworks, different isms, X, Y, Z. It's all over the place. So if I was really going to go by title or a few search terms or even keywords named by researchers or even abstracts, I'm not getting as much. I can examine, I can be a lot more intentional which sources I'm going to look at more closely in this way. So now I've zoomed back into some research around pedagogically productive talk that I found really fascinating because I can triangulate and I'm not just like going in every direction. What I found at the beginning of a dissertation process is when folks ask you to find a gap in the research and in all this kind of stuff, I'm just like lost. I can go in every direction. It's hard for me to discern that landscape. Part of that takes a lot of time. I know that we do a lot of reading, we do a lot of research and networking and all these kind of things, but it's accelerated my learning because it allows me to be more selective about what I more closely read. I actually find myself reading more scholarly research because I have a tool that helps me understand I'm going to get more from it. In other words, I was like, there was a disincentive if I had 5 papers that were printed and I started the first couple pages of one of them and it didn't seem to be on target with what my research was about. So that really is critical to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, this is huge because I feel the same way about my experience in this arena, in that am when I am being intentional about what I'm reading, and I know that this thing is going to answer my questions or this thing is going to help me solve this problem, I pay closer attention and I read it more deeply. Now, here's the power. We know that there are all kinds of things, strategies, and tools that we use and that we teach kids to use to help them understand a text better. And this AI tool is an example of something that can help us understand the text better, so that we can really come in not with a totally clean slate and not knowing anything about it, but having an idea of what it's saying, what we're trying to get out of it, and how we can use it for ourselves later. And I think that that's a really powerful place to come at this from, that this is just another way to help give us tools to understand the text better. Also, if we do the summary and see that there's nothing of value in there for what we're doing, then we can just totally bypass it and not worry about it. And like, okay, I'm glad I didn't spend an hour and a half reading that 90-page paper because I don't actually need anything from here. Or maybe I only needed this one section and I don't really need the rest. What are your thoughts on that?
That's it. That's it right there. That's it summarized, right? So I've found, like, in the past, like I mentioned this a while ago, sometimes a title, and folks trying to write a title that's going to grab you, right? And trying to get an abstract that'll get you and kind of tell you some of the things, but like not necessarily tell you all the details. So I've found papers that were on like teacher discourse, and I zoomed into it and I found like, kind of the sample was a little bit different than what I thought it would, or was making some claims about discourse in a classroom, but it was from a post-secondary environment or whatever it was. It just like, it would reveal something about the paper that either was really compelling, like I need to go into this paper and figure out what's going on, or saying like, great paper, just not oriented to what I'm researching right now, so I don't need to spend a lot of time with it. And I've found that, like, Science Direct will send me, here's some stuff that you're probably interested in. And sure enough, the titles, I'm interested in them. But when I click into them, if I start to investigate the papers themselves, sometimes I'll find that, oh, this one warrants like a couple more reads, right? This one warrants me like really getting it in a model and like asking some intentional questions about it. Or this one's like, well, not necessarily aligned with my research, not necessarily going to contribute to what I'm trying to design or what I'm investigating right now. It really kind of helps with that sorting piece. Whereas before, I'm just like, I have a spreadsheet. These are all my sources. Here, if I can earmark like a category, maybe, and it just is, it's so big that you kind of get lost in the little pieces and parts of it. It could just, the ability to zoom in and zoom back out in a moment. And that's kind of why I've landed on talking about it that way, is what helps me so much in the scholarly, because like you got 20 pages, like I need to know what it all is. Then I need to know if there's little parts that I can use. Then maybe none of it is helpful for me at this moment. Great paper, but not helpful for me right now. And I can do that now. Whereas before, it's just like, maybe all of these are important. I'll go through them one day.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. And that is one of the real challenges that we face, is that there's so much content out there. We need to know how to use our time wisely and be effective and productive with the time that we do have. So you've mentioned Science Direct a couple times, so I'm just going to shift conversation a little bit, because a lot of times this podcast is, pretty selfish for me to learn things. And so tell me about Science Direct and other places where you're getting your research as you're doing your dissertation and moving in that direction.
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure why I started with Science Direct, to be honest, but I know that they're really intentional with my email address, and they send to my school account. I got one, let's see, it was 3 days ago. Hey, here's some personalized recommendations based on your latest sign-in. So it knows that I'm interested in knowledge building, teacher PL, technical skills, discursive negotiations, critical discourse analysis. It knows pretty good. Mostly, I'm operating on Google Scholar, to be completely frank with you, and I'm using my university's library to access materials that are not as readily available through the open web. But I like these recommendations that are sent here. I get them from all over the place. I mean, like a million newsletters, and like I'm following the Edu conversation on a couple different platforms pretty readily every moment of every day. So but that's how I connect with resources, right? And like even as simple as, I mean, we have two little girls that live in this house with us, and I don't have a lot of time to deal with research. I just don't have time. I'm loving my family and otherwise, but I find myself when we're settling in and like watching a TV show, I can use my little telephone to interrogate a PDF while I'm hanging out with my family in 20 minutes, and decide if tomorrow I'm going to spend some time to dissect the source a little bit more. So Science Direct sends me stuff. I know a lot of different Elsevier, I think is I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. There's quite a few places nowadays. There's like a boom of tech and research tools. And quite a few of them do a pretty good job of helping you navigate myriad sources. I think Elicit's one of them. Cite is another one. But I find that one of the reasons why I like I know there's a lot of tools out there that can kind of do pieces and parts and build in functionality of summaries and looping all your research together. I like the autonomy of working with the source and working with the model directly. So that's why I kind of live through. I try to find as much as I can through Scholar, and if I can't find it there, I'm interlibrary loaning through my university, to be honest with you, so I can have the PDF itself and go from there.
Yeah, awesome. Very good. Well, I mean, this has been a good conversation here. I appreciate your time and your experience with this, and I'm going to use this a little bit more for myself to figure out what this looks like for me. And if people want to connect with you further on this, where should they reach out to you, Rod?
So I'm all over the internet. My handle on everything is Rod, RODJ Naquin. That's Naquin. That's on Twitter. It's on Substack. That's on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, everywhere you would look for me. It's Rod J Naquin. I actually have a relatively recent blog on my Substack where I'm talking about what does it mean to have a dialogue with a text. And you can follow my thinking there. My thinking is really kind of an intersection of dialogue and educational leadership, or how do we know what we know in educational institutions, and how does that come to life through our conversations? So that's why when LLMs came up, it was like, well, I mean, it's kind of an intersection of a lot of my interests here. But yeah, you can find me on Rod J Naquin pretty much anywhere online.
Okay, perfect. Well, appreciate your time, and this has been an awesome conversation. Thanks for joining me on Transformative Principle.
Yes, sir. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Jethro.